Hi, everyone. I'm Carl Bierock. Welcome back to the Jaguar Football Podcast. And with us, as always, this week is the head coach of Seckman Football, Dr. Nicholas Bear. Coach Bear, very good to see you. We have a lot to talk about today, and a lot just happened just mere days ago in Seckman Football. So we wanted to get your thoughts about, obviously, the blue and gold game. We had the big unveiling of the scoreboard. We also had, I would call it a party with a purpose over at Ferdby Lang Park over the weekend, and yet more activity on the horizon. So, first off, wanted to just get your thoughts about the blue and gold game, just, from what you saw in between, coaching some sessions.
Right. Yeah, busy Saturday last week, and honestly, I thought it went about as good as it could go. We had a great crowd. It's kind of one of those things. I know we always are able to get the parents to kind of show up, but really trying to open it up to the community, and having people invested in our program that may not even necessarily have a kid on the program. And that was evident on Saturday too. So obviously, the football was fun, but getting the chance to highlight our sponsors, unveil our scoreboard, and really showcase, the football team for the 2025 season. When you look at Saturday, we kind of checked all those boxes, and it was a great time.
Yeah, there was a lot of buzz in the stadium, not only with obviously just having the 180 so players out there for practice, but you had a lot of folks in the stands just talking about opponents and the schedule and gosh, they can't wait for this game, or I can't wait to see what happens on this side of the ball or that side of the ball. Wanted to get your thoughts because this was one of the bigger practices, I guess, that was open to the public.
Mm-hmm.
What did you like that you saw? And, now that you have one more week to prepare for week one with Parkway West, what are you and the coaches really going to instill in the players this week leading up to the game?
Yeah, you're out there watching the practice, you really got an idea of how we organize our mass of humanity on the football field. Now we were a little limited with space because everybody on the turf. Whereas compared when we're on the grass, we could send the freshmen, down towards the other side of the creek and practice on the other side. We send the JV over, so kind of get a sense of who we are, how we practice, how your kids are moving around the field. And then, yeah, the football was great. Watching the freshman scrimmage from a freshman standpoint, you're seeing a few guys make some plays. You're seeing guys work hard, encourage each other. Obviously a long way to go, in that aggression standpoint, standing around, what's your job? But, they actually looked fairly organized going 2 weeks into their, 2.5 weeks into their first game. Same thing with the JV. It's kind of as we go, you can kind of see how it ramps up with the organization, the execution, how much faster and bigger they are flying around the field. So really good to see the JV, go out there and compete. And, offense, defense kind of went back and forth a little bit with that group. And then finally the varsity, we got a lot of guys out there still competing for positions. And we saw a lot of that on Saturday. And, obviously, it's kind of every blue and gold game, the defense wins, if we're winning anything. Offense is kind of always that last piece of the puzzle to really get underneath. And we got a lot of good film, of the offense and just the, we've talked about it before, the offense, I know it looks simple, it looks basic, but there's a lot of intricate details. And really this is kind of, and I have to remind my assistant coaches too, because they're kind of like, oh my gosh, this is always this week where it's back to the details, back to the minor details of what actually makes these plays work. And, watching the film, we're one block here, one missed alley there, for really having some good plays and being an overall positive scrimmage. So, when we talk to the offense, it's what it's going to be all about. We're bringing them in for film today, going over a few of these plays and, hey, these are the details we're missing. These are the focus of the week. And then, hopefully have a little bit better showing when we go out to the Jamboree on Friday.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that because, this podcast, we really don't go down that road of like, who's plugged in here and,
Mm-hmm.
this position. I know you're on some other podcasts and shows, talking more about individual positions. But how does the practices go and your evaluations for this week compare to maybe what you do preparing for game day on Friday?
Yeah, well, this week really we got to really start making some decisions. It's kind of we have two guys that might be really equal at a spot, or one guy with a slight edge. Those competitions are going to start kind of coming to an end, and one person's going to be getting the full first team reps, and that the guy behind them, we've talked about it many times before, going to have to keep preparing like a Friday night. With no true opponent going into Friday, with the Jamboree, we're a little less focused on extreme details of another team. And still, really, the focus is kind of turned inwards, to who we are and what we still need to be able to do. And, really when it comes down to offensively, too, is, well, what are we capable of doing? What can we do? What can we remember? And we've hit on that a number of times. Week one, your playbook is that's about as small as it's going to get, and then you continue to expand throughout the season. So, we'll really have to break it down as coaches. Some plays are going to hit the cutting room floor for Friday, or excuse me, 2 weeks against Parkway West. Some are going to stay in and continue to get repped and worked, and that's where all the fun comes in. So, that's kind of where our mindset is this week.
Gotcha. And one last thought about the the event that we had on Saturday. Just wanted to give you the opportunity to thank the sponsors, or just send a message, because having them in the community. I mean, when you think about it, Seckman's kind of landlocked. There isn't
Mm-hmm.
much as far as businesses around here, but to get a group like these folks that are willing to donate their treasure, their time, their talent to not only Seckman football but just to Seckman in general, that's very special.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, we've always had a lot of support, definitely from our parents and people while they're in the program, and kind of really that fourth wall was, how can we get businesses to really buy into what we're doing and want to support the football team and support the community, and get their name out there, and we finally feels like we've cracked through that fourth wall of finding businesses and people that want to buy into our community, support our community. And yeah, this is their hard-earned money. They're not, they worked hard for this. They worked hard to build their business, and for them to want to give it back to the team, give it back to the program. We don't take that lightly. It's definitely appreciated. I mean, especially this first round of 12 sponsors, and especially our first three big ones, and Kevin Polite at Farmers Insurance, and Alex Gilbert at Gilbert Roofing, and as well as Blue Bunting and Steak and Shake, our premier sponsors. We appreciate these guys coming in when it started. When we were selling this idea, there was just grass over there, right? Now you see this big 13 by 26 scoreboard. It's a little easier to sell the idea. So having those guys on board, when it starts, really exciting, and definitely something we won't forget about. We want to appreciate them, and hopefully they continue to support us in the future.
And you nailed it, because there's so much possibility
Mm-hmm.
with this great, I consider it a gift. It's such a great gift to have something so nice. And then you think about the new playing service last year, so within a calendar year, you don't recognize the place. And so I really
Yeah,
think that when fans show up in about 10 days or 15, I can't do the math here real quick in my head,
11.
11 days, uh, they're going to be
Huge.
blown away. And, that helps build that excitement. And again, we appreciate everybody going out there and
Yeah.
supporting our
Well, then,
our
Carl, going
sponsors.
into next season too, we'll have the brand new LED lights next season.
It,
If you drive by Fox, you drive by Fox on 55, in the evening this year, you'll see their brand new LED lights. They got the LED lights this year. We got the new baseball field. Next year, they'll get the baseball field. We'll get the lights. So, that'll be a neat little addition going into 2026, but we got to get 2025 done, right? And you hit it
that's
earlier too. You talked about excitement and buzz, surrounding the season, and that's something that's always here this time of year. Every team, in the state of Missouri, whether they're going to end up 0-10, 2-8, 10-0, 7-2. I hope their program has some. If you don't have excitement around your program, in August, then there's things you're not doing right. And, I really feel like our boys are working hard. Our coaches are working hard, and hopefully we're end up able to pay that off with some success this season.
Well, I know there's everybody's looking forward to seeing what happens there that first Friday, and we were looking more forward at the beginning of this podcast in our conversation. Just wanted to have you kind of look backwards at the last week. I know you mentioned just minutes ago that you were still evaluating players. Is there anything to pass along that, as far as you wrap up the first full week of practice, now we have the second week, and then you start to get into your game week routine?
Mm-hmm.
Anything really stick out from maybe years past, or just, a couple positions, really making names for themselves?
Yeah, I mean, as far as sticking out, we've talked about it before. It's reloading. We're not rebuilding. We're not rebuilding the culture and things like that. So, honestly, a lot of it just feels like we've never left, and we're just reloading the team with different faces and different names, and guys are taking over roles that were played by seniors last year. Our kids have just been good. We have good kids. They've been showing up. I don't have to worry about so and so oversleeping or not setting an alarm. They're there, and they're ready to work, and they're ready to work hard. Now, getting them to do that every rep for 2.5 hours when it's 95 degrees outside, that's the challenge we face, and as coaches, and it'll never be easy. And that's why we get paid the big bucks, I guess.
Yeah, well, glad practice is running smoothly, and the dedication is there, because again, before you know it, it's going to be game day, not only on Friday nights but on Monday as well. So wanted to kind of ask you, and get your thoughts about what are the expectations for the players on that, either that Friday or that Monday, and conversely, what is the expectations for fans? There's folks that are new to the program, or maybe they have their boys are freshmen, or what have you. What can they expect? Not only from a player perspective, but also from a parent perspective.
Yeah, from the players, I've had this conversation with a few guys, because sometimes they need, you're not the main character, right? This what we do at Seckman Football is not about you. You are a part of something bigger than yourself. And so, I told them, hey, I want you to take a moment on Saturday. I want you to look around. I want you to see the 187 players on the field. I want you to see the hundreds of people in the bleachers. That's the greatest visual I can get you to understand that this is not about you. You are a part of a team, and your attitude and effort will determine, and obviously your ability, what role you have. And there's a role to be played, and the team needs you to do that. So even when we go into Friday nights, you know, making sure all of our guys know their roles and what they're supposed to do, and whether you're if you're a blue corner or a gold corner, or where you need to be, what coach you need to be standing by, what special teams need to be ready. How we kind of have a traveling road show. It's a carnival. When you talk about the amount of kids we're bringing around, and the equipment that has to be done, and you know who's helping with this, whose job duty is it to get this done. So our kids have done a really good job last few years. Acting correctly. Not making it about themselves. So that expectation will kind of really be similar. And then hopefully for fans, for parents, it's the cheapest ticket in town. Where else you're going to go for $5 and get 2.5 hours of entertainment? We're all going to be on that emotional roller coaster of a Friday night together. It is, and they're just a lot of fun to be around. And we've really worked hard to kind of build this Friday night atmosphere, and hopefully everybody's able to come and enjoy it. Plenty of things to stress about in life. Football ain't one of them. So that's kind of where we feel with that.
Then, as far as maybe players that were as freshmen, they're moving up to JV. You've been here also as a player, not only as a coach. What type of tips do you and your coaching staff pass along to them? Because I know it's got to be you got that nut, and just nut in your stomach, just like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, well, even yesterday, I'm sure, or excuse me, Saturday, I'm sure there were guys with little nerves in their stomach. Especially some of the younger guys, who've never played in front of that many people before. And at every level you go up, the lights get a little bit brighter. And I tell our JV guys all the time, you guys aren't preparing for Monday nights, you're preparing for Friday nights. And that's really the mentality you have to have. And I expect everybody, really including myself, we're all going to go out there with that knot in our stomach. going into our first game, whether it be on a Monday or a Friday. And, you know, once the ball's kicked, then everybody settles into their role. I mean, if you don't have them little butterflies in your stomach, you're not alive. So, you'll have that there. And then once the game starts, everybody kind of kicks into their mode, relies on their training and the work that they've put in. And, hopefully it's all able to pay off.
Just and then real quick, Coach. So, what's it like for you when you walked out of there as a student, walking down that hallway, outside the locker room as a student, and then also as a coach? Like, what's going through your mind as you're making that trek to the stadium?
Yeah, well, for me, I'm always worried about, have we done enough? Have we prepared? Could we have done more of this? And, you know, your heart's pounding a little bit. And, by the time we run out the tunnel, it's like, well, let's get the damn thing done. So, at some point when we get out there, it's time to roll. And those nerves, pretty much don't go away, like I said, till the ball's kicked.
Well, no doubt. And for folks who want to follow along, the social media channels are out there. We have a Facebook page. We put this podcast also up on YouTube in high definition. Also, we have our streaming partner over at Livestream STL. Coach, you had the pleasure to meet with them in their studio and talk about Seckman football. So a lot of great things going on. And before we get to your final thoughts, it was interesting that it was publicized on Facebook and some other sites about schools that are struggling to fill either a varsity team or maybe a JV, or maybe they don't have a freshman, they have to move everyone up to JV. You gave out an incredible stat when you were talking about the 360 plus players in Seckman football. Wanted to get your thoughts. There was recently an announcement, I believe a school out of Springfield, canceled their varsity season just 2 weeks away from kickoff.
Yeah, I say it all the time, where we are extremely blessed to be in the situation that we're in. And you know nationwide, statewide, participation levels are down. It just doesn't happen to be that way, in the Seckman Valley right now. And we're blessed for that. When you see teams, especially this time of year, I mean, a lot of teams are working through the summer. They have an idea of what they have. If you're not really working out with this through the summer, you're not really playing football. But at some schools, that's not the case. You don't really get much participation in the summer, and then you got to rely on what comes out really last Monday for your first day of practice. And, this is really that time of year where teams start to say, okay, hey, we have enough guys. We're not going to be able to field a freshman team. We're not going to be able to field a JV team, or even in this case, not be able to carry a varsity football team. I think we've had, in the past week, we've had one freshman team drop us already, and another JV team drop us on our schedule. But I know there was two varsity teams, unfortunately, that had to cancel their seasons. And it's just kind of one of those things. Misha, everybody kind of complains about how, hey, they don't let anybody know their districts, until that first Friday night, and everybody wants to get the districts out earlier. And this is kind of what they're waiting on. They're waiting to see, hey, are there teams, dropping to 8-man? Are there teams that quite simply, class 3 and above, that can't carry a varsity squad, numbers reasons, safety reasons. And that's kind of where a lot of programs are finding themselves now. And thankfully we don't. And, you referenced the 370, total youth and high school players here. Our numbers continue to trend in the right direction. So thankfully I don't foresee that issue here.
That's so good to hear. I feel bad for everybody involved in a situation like that, because on this podcast, I think it was a couple months ago, you were talking about how, like, the freshmen, they wouldn't be really able to handle a typical like varsity squad. They're just not there yet physically, maybe even emotionally mature. There's a lot to go into that.
Yeah, it really is. We've talked about program building and 9, freshman, JV, varsity football teams. But, if you're a football team, you have to cancel your freshman season, right? So now anybody on your freshman team has to play JV. So sometimes we make them 9, 10, or JV teams. Now your freshmen are playing against sophomores and maybe even juniors at time. So, you're talking about a really physical, mismatch. And then guess what happens? You get the snot kicked out of you, and then hey, football ain't as much fun anymore. And now that team that didn't have a lot of freshmen, now they're going to lose a few more, or even vice versa. You don't have a JV squad, but you only carry a 9-10, and now you got those juniors in the mix, that have nowhere to go. If you're carrying a 9-10 and no JV, you possibly are now once again facing teams with sophomores and juniors on the field on Monday. So it's just when that happens, it's really tough to get ahead, for some programs. So.
Yeah, well, we are certainly again fortunate to be in the position that we are, and it just wasn't dumb luck. It was through hard work, and so we're grateful to be in this situation. And for the folks watching the podcast frequency, now that the season's starting, we're going to be here every week, and so we'll have Coach breaking down the game footage and talking about the previews and things like that. So with that, Coach, just wanted to give you the floor. If there's anything else you'd like to pass along to the Jaguar Nation, we're excited. We cannot wait to pack the stands in 10 days.
Yeah, this coming Saturday, really only ask for 2 Saturdays a year from our team and our boys and our players, with the blue and gold game this past week. And then now full slate on Saturday morning with our Dad's Donuts and Decals. Any fatherly figure could come out, eat a donut, and slap a decal on their son's or player's helmet. We'll follow that with our team pictures. Usually could try to get that done about an hour and a half, and then follow it up with our mom's practice. So, it's just kind of a fun day for parents to kind of share football with their player. And blue and gold game obviously had some serious moments. We wanted to be focused. We wanted to be locked in. You got to watch. Now we want you down on the field, and we want you experiencing it with your players. So really neat morning. Hopefully everybody makes it a point to come out and share some of that time with their player, before school starts, before the season starts, and then we're in the thick of it. And so, great opportunity to kind of slow it down one more time.
All right. Well, we are excited for sure. And Coach, thank you so much for your time. And we will catch you next week as we start to count down toward Parkway West.
Thanks, Carl.
Thank you.